Good evening, YouTubers. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's Tuesday, 8 p.m., our regularly scheduled live stream. I'm so happy you're all here today. I think we're going to have a good live stream, good topic for us to discuss. I apologize here. I'm just forgot to fix up my iPad to go through all the chats and everything else. So just excuse me for 1 second. As always, the format is going to be the same. I'm going to discuss the topic. Afterwards, the floor will be open for any sort of comments, discussions, criticism, questions, anything that you want to. Obviously, it's not going to be limited to what I'm talking about or the topic of the day. You can literally ask anything you want to, but the floor is really up to you. As always, as you come in, just let me know how things are looking. Is the video good? Is the audio good? We had some problems in the past. I want to make sure that everything is cleared before we get going. Can's Cleanseth, signal is 5.5, and remember to mention the like. Yes, guys, as you come in, like the video. That really helps a great deal. It's as always, there's always problems with notifications. A lot of people that are otherwise would like to attend the live stream don't get proper notification. Then again, the live stream is always at the same exact time. It's Tuesday, 8 p.m. So even if there's notification, you should be able to know to come in and join the fun. Rules are always alike. Like I said, put in a comment, but for your comments to be read, for your question to be answered, for you to tell me that I'm all completely wrong and I don't understand what's going on, you've got to put @youtuberlaw in front of your comment. If you don't, I'm skipping it, because as far as I'm concerned, you're not asking me, you're just making a comment to the rest of the live stream population. So please, if you want me to read out your comment or respond, just put @youtuberlaw. As always, I'm going one by one. It's just chronological. It's the only way I can do it, with one exception. If you want to skip the line, if you have no patience, if you want me to jump right to your comment, just do a super chat and I'll read yours first and I'll get back. So it just becomes the only fair way to handle it, one by one, except for the super chat. Dirk, video and audio are working fine for me. Excellent. I did put on a new lens, so hopefully that works out well. I had a really great lens before, but its ability to handle low light was not as good as this one. This one and the entire setup allowed me to have a great deal of low light. In fact, I'm sitting in a pretty much a dark room with just a little bit of light, so that just makes my life a little more comfortable. Before, I had to do a lot of lighting in order to accommodate the stream here, and that just was not very comfortable for me, because literally I'm having tons of light projected on me. So this at least will be a little more comfortable, because the lens and the entire setup is a little better, so I think that will work well. Let me see, somebody says something about notifications. Skid Scott. Hey, Lior, for no notification, but happens to be browsing YouTube and notice stream. Glad to be here. Awesome, Chris. I'm really happy that you're here too. I can't explain the notification part of it. It's set up to notify everybody, but exactly why sometimes everybody gets notification and why a lot of times virtually nobody gets notification, that's really is not up to me. Complain to the Google gods, and that's kind of the topic of conversation today. Before we start the live stream, allowing people to come in, let's just take a look at the poll. I posted it in the past 24 hours. Basically, the topic of the day won by a large margin, 82%. Senator Elizabeth Warren calls for the breakup of Facebook, Amazon, and Google. Lost to, once again, continued, because I thought it was pretty popular last week, but we didn't get to talk about it, about Megan Murphy lawsuit against Twitter. But I like it when a topic wins by a large margin, because I know you want it. When it's a very close one, it's hard to choose which one to talk about. Okay, so let's just jump in. When we come back, start the conversation right away. And we're back. So glad everybody's here. Once again, I'm just going to set the rules of the game. Come in, put in your comments. even though I'm going to start by talking about the topic, just lay out your comics. Once I'm finished, probably should be no more than 10 minutes. I'll jump right back in and respond to each one of your comments, your questions, your criticism of what I'm saying. Just make sure to put at youtuberlaw in front of it. That'll tell me that you want me to read it out. Doesn't have it, I'm not reading it. You want to jump the line because you don't want it to be chronological. Do super chats and I'll jump right into your comment. Today's story about Senator Elizabeth Warren and her idea to break up the large tech company is actually very, very interesting because in some ways it parallels the work I'm doing as part of a large volunteers group. For those of you who don't know, or have not followed us a little closely, I'm part of a group of about 80 volunteers. We're working on a complaint to the Federal Trade Commission alleging that Patreon, PayPal, and Stripe colluded illegally and abused their position as monopolies in the marketplace, in their banning of certain YouTubers and in their reactions to certain platforms, in this case Subscribestar, that followed the banning of Sargon of Akkad. By the way, we do have a brand new website at youtuberlaw. There'll be a link down below. Check it out. I think it's a really good job that the volunteers did. You can go there. You can join us. You can help us in different ways. So go check it out. But our work in many ways focus on a number of different segments, but involving a couple of things. First of all, you cannot ignore the sense of political discrimination that are inherent in some of these platforms as part of the action, and the anti-competitive impact that what they're doing is having on the market. And this, at least on a very kind of 64,000 foot level, mimics what Senator Warren is saying here. So I'm going to go through her announcement. She made the announcement about 4 days ago. And I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to highlight some of the areas where I'm in agreement with. Truthfully, I'm going to highlight a lot of things that I'm completely in disagreement with. I'm going to follow it up with a discussion of some of the things that Representative David, now I forgot his name, David Cicilline said. He is the House ranking member on the Antitrust subcommittee and is considered a rather powerful guy within the House. His proposal for how to deal with some of the issues of discrimination and antitrust problem with the big tech companies, to give you a bigger idea of what some of the more left-leaning representatives and senators are pushing for and what they believe in. And then we're going to discuss some of the opportunities here, because I'm absolutely not saying that there's only one side to it or there's only one way. I do believe, and I've discussed it in the past, that the biggest problem in politics, in my opinion, is that compromise has become a four-letter word. It's something that everybody shies with. As a result, everybody stands on their based on their own little everybody's grandstanding, believe that their idea is the only one, and as a result, we reach nothing. We're not really helping the individuals. I think that there's a real opportunity, even if you disagree with a lot of things, and I disagree with a lot of the stuff here, that there is an opportunity here to come to a solution that really helps everybody, regardless of your position about some of the problems that are inherent in tech companies. So let's jump in and take a look at the announcement made by Senator Warren. And it's in front of us here, and it's a blog post that she posted to Medium, and it's called "It's Time to Break Up Amazon, Google, and Facebook." And it says, "Today's big tech companies have too much power. Too much power over our economy, our society, and our democracy. They've bulldozed competition, used our private information for profit, and tilted the playing field against everyone else. And in the process, they've hurt small businesses and stifled innovation." That doesn't really tell us much, just kind of a bit of grandstanding, but otherwise doesn't say anything that probably most people would disagree with. I think that a lot of people agree that there's some problem with the big tech companies, specifically the platform-based companies. Some people don't understand exactly why Amazon is thrown in there. We'll discuss it, but especially the platform-based companies, because whether or not you believe it's discrimination based on political agenda. Some believe that there's discrimination based on sex and race. Some people believe it's discrimination based on political affiliation. I think that a lot of people can agree that there's a problem here that can be dealt with. We need to stop this generation of big tech companies from throwing around their political power to shape the rules in their favor and throwing around their economic power to snuff out or buy up every potential competitor. Now, you're already starting to get a sense of what's being involved here. There's definitely an issue with anti-competitive. The concept is that these large companies have grown not as much by innovation, but by buying out competitors, and that's a problem. But you can already see here when they start talking about political power is that part of this is somewhat of an anti-Trump statement. The idea being that maybe the platforms have been manipulated, whether or not by citizens or by foreign forces, to subvert our election. That's part of what's motivating that. That should not put anybody off, even if you disagree with that, because a lot of times, and it's true about a lot of things in our politics, the reason doesn't matter as much as the solution. Let's work through it and see whether or not the solution makes sense here. So Americans' big tech companies have achieved a level of dominance based on two strategies, and this is the two big problems they're using mergers to limit competitions. And we've seen that before, right? I mean, truthfully, the biggest competitor to Facebook in recent memory was Instagram. That was the one Facebook was most concerned about, and it bought it out. Before that, it was Twitter. Twitter was not willing to sell. Twitter was not willing to sell to anybody. Also to Google, everybody tried out, and that's actually, I think, is very good for competition. But there's no doubt that companies like Facebook grew through acquisition. They bought up WhatsApp as well, which was also a platform-based tool that could have threatened the dominance of Facebook. So I don't disagree with that. And using proprietary marketplace to limit competition. And this is where really the Amazon question comes in. The idea being that some companies provide both a platform and a product. So something like an Amazon is providing a platform through which people buy products, but it is also a retailer of it in its own right. So it's selling products alongside other retailers who are selling products on its own platform. The idea behind this is that it's anti-competitive when the platform is providing the basis and also then competing. Now, people may agree or not disagree. You have to say that they're also applying it to Google. The idea is Google's providing search results, but it's also providing results for its own products. Apple the same way. It's providing an app store, but it's also providing a spot for people to buy their own product through the app store. So the idea presented here, which is not so simple, you can't reach a conclusion very quickly, we'll talk about it, is that a company that provides the platform maybe should not be competing with other providers on the same platform. And maybe those two roles should be separated. Weak antitrust enforcement has led to a dramatic reduction in competition and innovation in the tech sector. Well, that's just a conclusion without really any proof. There have been discussion of whether or not there has been a slowdown in startups over the last, let's say, 10 years or so, and what's the causes of it, and why are VCs not supporting tech companies the same level they did before? Is that some structural problem in the market? Is that because of the kind of innovation? This post seems to insinuate it's a lack of antitrust enforcement or weak enforcement by the government. There is no real basis on which to conclude that. Definitely the studies do not bear that out. Now, I am in agreement that the lack of enforcement of antitrust, and it's normally not because there's anything wrong with the enforcers. I think the FTC does a remarkable job. I think there's some problems with our laws that can be corrected. But I don't believe that has a huge sectarian kind of impact on the market, that really is the reason why we have fewer and fewer startups in the market. I think that there's also maturization in the market. I think that VCs understand things that they didn't understand 10 or 15 years ago, where they lost enormous amount of money back in just about every crazy project. And now they're a lot more careful in it, and I don't think that's a bad approach. You know, I represent a lot of startups, and I've just seen the shift. I've seen money thrown at startups 10 years ago, and I see now they're just a lot more careful. They're demanding a lot more. They're now willing to back ideas. They're looking for you to have proven himself. They look for you to actually build a product, not just show them a simple idea. Things have changed, so I don't think that's a simple conclusion, but I see where she's coming from here. America has a long tradition of breaking up companies when they have become too big and dominant, even if they are generally providing good service at a reasonable price. That's just outright wrong. That's not the case at all. Our antitrust laws see nothing wrong with large companies growing because they are just that much more successful and they're providing good product, and people are benefiting by receiving lower and lower prices. The problem emerged when companies utilize their market, take advantage of their position in the market to the disadvantage of consumer, where for once they raise prices or they're not providing sufficient value to the marketplace. That's when the law jumps in. The idea that we don't like large companies that become dominant is not true at all. We've allowed that throughout our lives, whether or not it's in banking and finance and in industrials. Often companies reach monopolies for a lot of reasons, simply because they are that much better. Sometimes because it's a market that actually favors natural monopolies, because there's enormous amount of investment in infrastructure that can be easily replicated. It makes sense for one company to dominate. So it's not true that we have a long history of breaking up companies. In this tradition, my administration would restore competition to the tech sector by taking two major steps. First, by passing legislation that requires large tech companies to be designated as platform utilities and broken apart from any participants on that platform. Now, the concept of calling something a platform utility appeals to a lot of people, often for very, very different reasons. We're going to talk here. Here she's talking largely from a competitive standpoint, kind of like what we talked about Amazon and Google and even Apple. The idea being that some companies provide a platform but then compete on their own platform, as a result can actually subvert competition. I think a lot of people listening to the stream see the same kind of problem, but from a completely different perspective of saying, well, the impact of having a large company so dominant is that it's not treating all speech alike. The idea of having kind of what they call a platform utility is really about allowing for there to be no discrimination whatsoever as to who can access it. So I like the term being used. I don't necessarily agree with how it's applied here, but I think there's a potential here, at least if you think about it, as should we designate some of these platforms as utilities? What would that, having the conversation, what would that actually mean from a practical standpoint? Not from a political standpoint, but rather from a practical standpoint about access to the internet, access to services, access based on your affiliation or your being part of a group, whether or not it's based on race, sex, and national identity, or based on your political affiliation and political association, or just about speech. These companies would be prohibited from owning both the platform utility and any participants on that platform. That's the idea behind Amazon should not be selling its own product. Platform utilities would be required to meet a standard of fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory dealing with users. Platform utilities would not be allowed to transfer or share data with third parties. So, in many ways, that should be appealing to a lot of people. Both people feel that some of these platforms are discriminating against people based on certain class, right? We had the case of Facebook that was permitting people to advertise. The problem was largely in housing, and allowed them to segregate their advertising based on race and economic socioeconomic position of those people, which can be in violation of some basic discrimination law when it comes to housing. So yes, I think that designating some of these utilities, some of these platforms as utilities can help in that respect, because now you forbid there from being any sort of discrimination based on certain protected classes. I think that is an opportunity to also expand beyond that, saying it's not just based on protected classes, but when we designate something as a utility, it should be non-discriminatory, period. Short of you not paying for something, you are never forbidden from having access to water and electricity. These platforms should be very much alike. There should be no prohibition against you based on most factors, absent certain very, very strict one like not paying, or certain you calling for certain actions which could be violent or would otherwise be violative of the law. Second, my administration would appoint regulators committed to reverse illegal and anti-competitive tech merger. And they're talking about Amazon with Whole Foods and Zappos, Facebook with WhatsApp and Instagram, Google with Waze, Nest, and DoubleClick. Unwinding these mergers will promote healthy competition in the marketplace. I'm completely disagree with any of that. I don't believe, first of all, that the problem is necessarily Amazon owned the platform and Amazon selling it, nor do I believe that any of these, well, in fact, none of these mergers were illegal. Maybe you would not have advised against it, would have permitted it. The idea would be, should Facebook have been permitted to buy out Instagram? Questionable. I would agree with that. I think that was seen by many, many people that was basically killing a competition, the really only viable competition that Facebook had at the time. I think that was ill-advised, and I would agree with that. First of all, I do not support reverse mergers, nor do I necessarily support breaking up companies. I think that it doesn't solve a problem. You take in Google and say, you know what, I'm going to break up. Your search engine is going to be separate from your advertisement. I think that that's kind of ridiculous goals. We all benefit from the commingling of a lot of these services because it allows one service to actually support and finance another. We all enjoy being able to use Google search for free or Facebook for free, and we know that that's supported through advertisement. And the idea that we should be separating them is I think anti-consumer. I don't think it leads us toward the solution. I agree that there is some real problem with the way these tech companies as a platform treat people, that there are overt discrimination problem on that both sides can agree on. I think that there are anti-competitive action that a lot of people can agree on. I just don't think that breaking up the companies gets you there. If you took Facebook and you decided to separate the platform and services providing from, let's say, it providing WhatsApp, I don't think you're really improving competition. Might be different with Instagram, although I would not necessarily agree that that's the solution today in terms of reversing it. I wouldn't agree to it in the future, but not necessarily reverse it. And then she talks about what would happen. Here, what won't change. You'll still be able to go on Google and search like you do today. You'll still be able to go on Amazon and find 30 different coffee machines. And then she goes into what will not change. Small businesses would have a fair shot to sell their products on Amazon without fear of Amazon pushing them out of business. See, that's the kind of conclusions you really can't reach. First of all, when you separate two services provided by a single platform, you don't know what the impact is. And assuming that you do, that's really easy to make when you're a politician, but it's not so in real life. That's what makes economic studies so difficult, because it's very, very difficult to ascertain what the impact of anything will be. Like I said before, you're enjoying Google being free. When you separate it, let's say, from advertising, or you don't allow Google to advertise it, to include its own services within its search result, what's the impact on the cost differential? Will Google not have to pay for some of the services in order to finance what otherwise they would have gotten for free? Same thing here with Amazon as well. And my point a lot of times is, well, rather than say this is wrong, meaning a platform should not be able to sell on its own platform, say, well, you investigate and you make sure that if there are instances where the platform actually favored its own search result to the detriment of its competitors, you act on that. Enforce existing antitrust laws, investigate these platforms for a lot of anti-competitive behavior, for if they are promoting their own services to the detriment of others, if they are taking information that they are gathering from the marketplace in order to through merger basically do what they cannot otherwise compete in. I'm all for that, but the idea that you necessarily have to break them up, I think that's the most extremist of solution. It's something that if you can get there through enforcement of the laws, you preserve that solution for the end. But very, very few times have we ever actually broken up companies. This blog seems to suggest that it happens a lot. Very, very rarely. And then it goes into something here that I find interesting. And it says, we must help America's content creators, from local newspapers and national magazines to comedians and musicians, keep more of the value their content generates rather than seeing it scooped up by companies like Google and Facebook. Where did you hear that before? That's Article 11 and potentially Article 13 out of the EU. Straight out. The idea is that somehow it's all tilted in favor of the platforms, and we should do something to protect the content creators, the copyright holders, against the abuse of the platforms in terms of financial. That's just straight out Article 11 that tries to tax platforms for usage of content creators in their search result, or it is also Article 13 that basically said that you need to filter out any sort of any sort of infringing content before it actually comes up. I think that not only is it was wrong in the EU, and I think a lot of people are opposed to it. I think bringing it to the US will be disastrous. I completely disagree with that. And then it again says, and we must ensure that Russia or any other foreign power can't use Facebook or any other form of social media to influence our election. Again, that's back to the idea ultimately that part of this is motivated by the idea that the election was illegitimate and we need to control this platform to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I'm telling you all of that because I think people need to understand what's motivating this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't support the ideas. I'm not telling you, I have no idea who's going to win the election, and I'm not telling you to vote for any one person, and I don't know what's the chance that the senator will become president. It doesn't really matter here. It's the ideas, because those ideas actually are being pursued currently within Congress, specifically within the House, which is where I'm going to go next, which is a discussion about what's happening in the House, specifically some of the ideas being presented by Representative Cicilline, who is the ranking member of the Antitrust subcommittee. And I want to show you some of the stuff he's talking about, because I think this will bring it all together. This is an article where he's being interviewed here, and he says, "It became clear to me that one of the central issues was the economic concentration of power and the corresponding concentration of political power that resulted in fewer choices, higher prices, and so on. And the more I thought about it, the more it became clear to me that this economic challenge, where people are working harder and harder and not getting ahead in this enormous concentration of wealth at the very top, this wasn't just by accident." A big part of what's pushing this antitrust, I don't know what to call it, the idea that technology companies should be broken up, that antitrust is too weak, is the idea of economic inequality, that there is money and power at the top with a massive discrepancy to the majority of the people. And today, while in the past this was controlled through the railroad and oil and gas, now it's being controlled through technology, and the idea is that we can actually fight that through antitrust. So again, some of the goals, some of the ideas of, we need to improve competition and reduce discrimination as on this platform, I can get behind. But again, a lot of the motivation behind it it's not something that speaks to me in particular here. Especially not the idea that we need to fight economic discrepancies between individuals through antitrust and breaking up companies. And so it made me realize that if we're going to be serious about taking on income inequality again and getting this country working for working people, again, we must take this competition issue directly. The idea is that anti-competitive behavior by tech companies are creating the economic inequality within the population. None of that is actually being explained. It's actually very shoddy kind of argument. Nonetheless, again, I don't care if we can both agree on the goal itself. I don't care about what motivates people to get there. These platforms are really the gatekeepers, so we have to make an effort to prohibit anti-competitive behavior online, and I think we have a lot of work to do to protect privacy. One of the best ways we can approach the privacy issue is use of portability and interoperability approaches. And it says here, the European Union is doing this, so it's not impossible. Once again, we see that a part of what motivates this goal to reform antitrust and to improve competition and reduce discrimination are based on goals and laws and regulation that are coming out of the EU. A lot of stuff that I basically was in disagreement with in the EU, they see here. Now, do I necessarily have a problem with some of the interoperability? Not really. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. I told you before, I believe that we've reached a point where there should be a recognition that when these companies collect data, it belongs to us. And when we permit them to gather our data, we are basically doing so under a license that we can revoke at any time so they can come back to us. But ultimately, it's ours. It's not theirs. Right now, they're operating on the idea that the data they collect belongs to them. It's their assets. And I say that it's not. It's actually ours. We are just licensing out to them. It's something that we should be able to control. Interoperability is a difficult concept. I'm not sure how that would work. The idea being that if I no longer want to work with Facebook and I want to switch over to somebody else, I should be able to download all my information, have it not available to Facebook at all, and then upload it to a competing platform. And that should help out. That's an interesting idea. I don't know how that actually works in real life, how I can take data from Facebook and upload it somewhere else. I think it also creates what I would say would be an unfair competition by taking information collected by one company and just giving it wholesale to another company. I would like to think of it as more information that I own, and I can actually terminate the license I provided, at which point all the information is terminated. Any company that wants to compete has to collect it on their own. Again, ask me for information, do it. Interoperability, I think, is not necessarily a workable solution, but I'm not in complete disagreement to something like that. So much of, oh, here it is. Sorry, I didn't turn it on. So much of the value of these platforms is based on the value of their algorithm. This time, the time has probably come for the agencies to be able to audit algorithms to make sure they are not being applied discriminatorily based on false data or conclusion. Now, let's understand that my thinking about algorithm and probably Representative Cicilline and Senator Warren is probably very different. They're thinking about it from, you've got an algorithm that might discriminate based on your race, sex, nationality. And I think that what we see a lot more is algorithms that actually attack this content of speech, irrelevant where it's coming from, right or left. I think that's where the discrimination comes in, based on content, not necessarily as much about based on the qualities and features and the association of the individual behind it with different groups and different protected classes. Nonetheless, I can get behind an idea that there could be a confidential auditing of algorithm to assure non-discrimination. Even if we don't necessarily agree on what the priorities is, it's absolutely fine here. Doesn't have to be my way or the highway kind of thing, but we may be reaching it from different points of view, but the idea is still probably correct. Oh, that's the end of that article. And this is basically where I wanted to take this discussion, is that there's a proposal that's somewhat of a hyperbole about we need to break up the companies. I don't believe that that's the problem. I think that we should follow the law as it actually written, where the breaking up the companies, it's actually an extreme solution that need to be reserved in the event that we find that the companies cannot actually adhere to the law. And we need to investigate and actually hold these companies liable when they are, in specific instances, are being anti-competitive, where they are favoring themselves over competitors, where they're killing competition, where they're building a platform but then using their platform to actually hurt competitors that are actually working off of the platform. I'm in complete agreement with that. I just don't believe that breaking up the company is the solution. I believe that we just need to prosecute. We need to change some of the laws in order to be able to prosecute it. We need to realize that up until now, we've only looked at antitrust from a purely pricing issue. You know, are consumers actually facing higher price because of the anti-competitive behavior? And I think we have to realize that in today's world, where everything is so easily integrated, the consumer is enjoying a lot of free or very, very low cost services. And I don't think we need to undermine that benefit to the consumer. What we need to do is actually still make sure that the consumer is not harmed in other ways, because while he's maybe provided low price or free products, they are not being provided with alternative products. And I think we need to look at that and actually pursue antitrust actions against that. So a lot of the goals being pushed by both the Senate and the representatives, I can get behind, though not necessarily the reasons why they're doing it, nor necessarily the solution. But I think it opens up a real discussion for, if people are willing to compromise, that there are potential solutions there that a lot of people can get behind and actually achieve something. I think there's a real solution, a real solution to a lot of people across all the political spectrum, as long as people need to realize that maybe we can focus on everybody's problem, not just the problems that I see today. So, not saying anything about the political side of it. Again, whether or not there's any chance of her becoming president or the Democrats gaining more control of the Senate or anything like that, I think that's almost irrelevant here. It's about they are raising an issue here that on its face, the goals set by it is actually something supported by the right as well. And I think it gives an opportunity for everybody to work toward a solution that, you know, makes everybody a little happier than where they are today. Anyway, tell me your thought about it. Tell me how wrong I am. Tell me that, or ask me any question about this or anything else. Put it in the comments below. As always, make sure to put @youtuberlaw. If you posted a question and did not put @youtuberlaw, by all means, repost it, because I wouldn't know that you're asking it. Sir Gunner, what does Amazon own? Well, Amazon is not as much of an issue, at least in my opinion. But Amazon bought Whole Food and it bought Zappos. For some reason, those are being identified as anti-competitive and should be reversed. I have no idea why. Zappos sold shoes. Now it did expand, but really more under Amazon into other areas. But to say that Zappos was necessarily a competitor of Amazon, that by buying it killed competition, I think it's kind of overstretching it. I think that Amazon took a very successful shoe retailer online and then expanded it to match more and more of what Amazon is doing anyway. So I don't think it killed competition in this case. I think it actually, it took a very successful, very niche product and expanded it, and now it resembles more and more Amazon. I think it would be inappropriate to break that up. And the idea of Whole Food, again, I don't think Amazon is killing competition at all. Whole Food is not a competitor of Amazon whatsoever. Amazon saw an opportunity to expand into areas where, largely because it was already getting a foothold in a lot of these cities, and it got it through their warehouses, and now saw opportunity to be that much closer to the consumer by buying out those Whole Food location and then being able to deliver their products through it. So I think it actually was very, very shrewd move by Amazon, but not an anti-competitive move by Amazon. Bart Silverstein, stream is going good. Good to go. Awesome. Thank you. Chris Scott. We already read that. Thank you. Brian Skeen. Any updates on the CIG versus Crytek? There has been some small updates since we last spoke. Right now, they basically are setting a time to create a schedule for you know, from alternative resolution, whether or not they're going to try to mediate on potentially when they're actually going to start the lawsuit and everything else. That's not that interesting because that's more procedural. It doesn't tell us anything of what really is happening in the background, because the courts always set up those schedules regardless of what's happening. So we don't know from that whether or not they're negotiating a settlement from behind the scene or not. There has been a response to, I believe, what was now the Second Amendment complaint or the Third Amendment complaint. So I'm looking to whether or not to cover that. I don't believe there's anything new, but I have to look into a little detail to see whether or not there's some new information to be gathered from it. But nothing earth-shattering about it. But I'm considering doing a video about the updates, about the response for next week. Marty Naselli, any thoughts on the SEC asking the court to hold Elon Musk in contempt? I think that he brought it on himself. I have a lot of respect and admiration for the man. I think that he's picking the wrong fight here. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever why he's picking a fight with the SEC. It's not a fight you can win. You don't win fights with the government, and there's just no real reason for it beside the fact that he would like to speak without any sort of control on through social media. The thing is, he reached an agreement with the SEC of having his company or his board of director, or at least some sort of committee, actually approve what he says. And he pretty much went online the next day and on TV and says that he doesn't care. No, he can say whatever he wants to. Nobody is actually watching over what he says. So right away, he reached a resolution with the SEC and then told the world the next day that he's completely ignoring it. And I think from a regulatory perspective, regardless of what you think about Elon Musk and whether or not he did anything wrong, I think the SEC cannot let it stand. It cannot seem to be so impotent that it actually not only files a complaint and reaches a settlement with somebody and agreeing to let them go, and then it's completely ignored whatsoever. So I think that they have to do it. I think that as a regulatory body, they have to pursue actions against him in order to maintain some sort of power against other individuals and other companies when it comes to their prosecution. So I think they have to go after him. Cons Clanseth, Senator Warren wants to push antitrust action. I'm skeptical, but I will hear her out. That's exactly how I see it. I think that I'm not a member of any of those political parties. I don't believe in political parties. I am officially unaffiliated. That's my political choice. That's what I have on my vote card. So I couldn't care less between them, between the right and left. But at the end of the day, I think that there are real issues with online platforms. I think that starting to talk about it from a political perspective, about whether or not they should be treated as utilities and what that means, I think that's very helpful. I just think that both sides need to be engaged in this conversation and ignore the reasoning why, let's say, the left wants it. Understand that they're all going toward one thing, which is how should we regulate these tech companies or these platforms in a way that's not discriminatory, that promotes competition. That's something that people on the right and the left agree to. They may not come from the same perspective, the same ideals, but they can reach a set of principles that everybody agrees on. And I think that's what's important here. Count Dooku, hey. With Tim Pool interviewing Jack Dorsey and associates on the Joe Rogan podcast and making them openly admit bias to the left, do you believe this could eventually lead to legislation? I think that it was a very important podcast. Really, all the power to Joe and Tim for what they accomplished, and I have really respect for Twitter for coming on and being forthright. Sometimes admitting to things that we disagree with, but being forthright and trying to resolve it. I think it's less of an admission, but rather an admission of a goal that they need to control speech. I don't think that in itself will lead to legislation. I don't think they said anything that broke the law that needs to be dealt with. And I don't think they said something that people did not already know it's happening, that ultimately these platforms believe that they need to control and manage the conversation in a specific way. Now, that leads them to create lots of rules that might be more biased in one way or another, but it's ultimately this idea that they need to manage the conversation. And I think that falls in line with some of the stuff we're talking about, even though the right and left may not agree on the substantial concept here, that the left may agree that the message should be managed more carefully and certain speech may be restricted, while the right may feel that they are victimized by it and they want to see freer speech. But I think that this may lead ultimately to some of the concept we're talking about here that's brought up by Senator Warren and Representative whatever his name was, Cipollini? What's his name? I keep forgetting. Cicilline. That, maybe it's time to look at these platforms as utilities, and what does that ultimately mean? I think that's where it's going to. I don't think the podcast itself would lead to legislation, but I think it supports the views of both sides. Maybe it's time to look at these platforms a little differently than we have until now. Mike Musk. Lior, this is off topic. Well, what do you think of the almost no covering foreign actors being caught pretending to be part of Haitian PM Prez security, a suspect of assassination attempt? I will be forthright. I don't know anything about it. Generally, unless it deals with certain topics, I don't follow, and I do it on purpose that I don't follow those kind of political news. I find that they don't add anything to my life, and so I've made a conscious effort over the last 2-3 years to avoid a lot of the news that simply I find extraneous here. So I focus on stuff that interests me, things that push me forward, things that I care about. So I literally haven't heard about it because it's just not the kind of stuff that I follow. Conclanseth, is it just me, or this is a scripted let's appeal to the public that will get tossed if she gets elected? That's an interesting idea. My understanding is, and I think a lot of you are probably more politically astute than me and know about this more, that this is not necessarily new. Meaning, she has discussed this in the past, but nobody expected to come out and say this is part of my policy. So I don't think she's playing it. Whether or not she will have the support of a party, and whether or not, let's say, that she wins in the nomination and then she wins both houses, whether or not this will actually go forward, it's not so simple. You have to actually change the law, right, to amend antitrust law so there actually is a prosecution by the Federal Trade Commission or the Justice Department against those companies. And so this is a long process. The president doesn't have that kind of power. But I think that there is a value in starting a conversation, and I have to commend her for that, for starting the conversation about this, because I think that, as far as the 64,000 foot level, I think that both sides can agree that it's a worthwhile discussion, that there's something to be had here, that we can maybe make both sides happy, if not completely, take us much further along than we are today. Derna 1804. Hi, Lior. Hey. If the FTC decides a company is an illegal monopoly, does that company have due process rights to contest the claims? Absolutely. It has to be that way, right? I mean, it's there's nothing in our society that allows, you know, the government to declare you in violation, and that's the end of the day. The FTC is a very powerful agency. It almost acts like its own court. It can issue subpoenas, and it then basically issues a complaint, and then it internally makes decision about whether or not it finds the company guilty. That does not mean that the company cannot do anything. The company can fight the entire process at any point by going to the federal system, I believe to the circuit courts of appeal, so it can appeal each and every decision that the FTC makes. So it doesn't if it wants to try to squash the subpoena, mainly the demand for documents by the FTC, it can go to a courts of appeal and actually try to squash it. It can actually then appeal any sort of decision by the FTC. It doesn't have to reside within the FTC. The FTC has a lot of power, but a company is always able to then take it outside of that the process and go to the court system, which is obviously a very important process. And virtually, there's really two things: companies that once they see the complaint, basically say, okay, let's find a settlement and let's not go forward, or companies that fight it, and if they lose, appeal it to the courts and then go through the whole process. Master of Osis, how you doing? Warren seems focused on the size of the companies rather than any anti-competitive conduct. How would she increase competition beyond just shrinking them via forced splitting? I think you're correct. And look, I think that she made broad generalization about some anti-competitive behavior. The idea that Amazon, both being a platform and a retailer, is anti-competitive, but didn't indicate any specific events where that was found to be true. Now, it might be, but you need basically either the FTC or courts to find that that was true. Same thing with Google. There have been a lot of discussions, a lot of complaints, and there have been lawsuits in the past about whether or not Google can promote its own products and favor them in search results over competitors, and that has been discussed. But ultimately, if that's anti-competitive, you need to have the FTC go after them and actually have to force them to change that. And if the FTC doesn't have the tools to do it because of the way antitrust laws are written today, then yeah, you can revise some of the antitrust laws in order to impact that. But until you prove that a specific action is anti-competitive, you don't impose a solution that's so draconian like, let's split it, because being large in itself is not wrong. And there is a lot of benefit to the consumer from those large companies. As we talked before, a lot of time it's having free or very low cost access to incredible tools that we all enjoy. And this is not harmful to the consumer. We need to focus antitrust laws on some non-pricing harm to consumers, for instance, not being able to have any competition. Are they in fact killing competition? Are they pursuing actions that are reducing the competitive landscape or that are reducing the availability of competitive products? All of that can be added on to antitrust law. But I agree that size alone is not an indication, and as a result, if you pursue let's break up those companies, I think that you're not getting toward the solution. You just made a big action, which may lead to what the prior commenter actually said, where is this real or is this just something that is done basically for the cameras? And in that sense, it's quite possible, though I believe that she ultimately believes that this should happen. It might be a politician pushing for a large event that's going to get a lot of attention, even though it's really not the solution. And maybe that's unlikely to be really the goal of the administration if she's ever elected. But really, how do we solve this antitrust problem here, the competition problem in the marketplace? Solanumatinker. Solano a ticker. I'm not sure. If people license the data, wouldn't tech companies just change the terms of service to grant them a permanent license and right to use and sell the data? No, not if we set the law as saying that it always belongs to consumers. Consumers cannot sell the data absent very, very specific rights. You cannot change that. If I'm licensing you the right, you are not in a position to ever change that. Part of some of the stuff I've spoken about before, that I believe that some of the elements in terms of service are or should be considered unconscionable. Specifically, the idea, when it comes to privacy, which is really more of a privacy issue rather than terms of service, of me when I'm granting you rights to my data, that should not be subject to change absent my consent to it, and actually outright consent to it. And that's how you would approach it. Basically say that that the licensing of personal data is not subject to change without a written agreement, and cannot be done through the most common way, which is typically done. Look, this is you agree to today's license, and if you continue using our service, you are then agreeing to any change we make in the future. I think you basically throw away that as being unconscionable and say every time you actually want something from people and you want to get extra, you want to go beyond licensing, you want to make it not subject to termination, you have to actually highlight it and show it to people so they understand it, not present them with a 10-page license that they will not be able to understand. So you get into those kind of things. Marty Naselli. Amazon also built AWS that holds a sizable portion of the web hosting market share. You're correct. But they were, as far as I know, that was a genius move by them. They did something that nobody really understood at the time why they would be getting into it. They understood it because they needed it for their own operation, and they understood at that point, we can actually just take our expertise and make it available for everybody else. That's exactly what they did with their own marketplace. Once they realized that they have to build the warehousing, they have to build the delivery systems and the management of all the inventory, they can then resell it to other retailers and just collect a fee off of it. So I don't begrudge them success from such actions, as long as, again, whether or not you reach that point because you purchase companies or because you're just better than everybody else there, the question is what you do with it. And are you misusing the market power that you have in order to reduce competition here? That's the key issue, but you have to prove that. You have to actually do the work. You can't say, by virtue of you being the monopoly or a de facto monopoly or the biggest company, that in itself should not be the basis for breaking up the company, at least from that perspective. Maybe you should give us a hint as to what we should look at, but not the basis for actually breaking you up. John Taylor. By Amazon buying storefront operation, they're competing with Walmart, and Walmart has influence within politics. I see what you're saying, that Walmart has been a competitor of Amazon. Walmart has, from a purely competition standpoint, has suffered as Amazon succeeded. Walmart has lost sales. People often go to these stores, try things out, and if the price is better, they go to Amazon. Amazon had competitive advantage by not having those to carry the rents on the stores and the taxes and the employees and everybody else that support the sales. And the idea being that if they're competing with Amazon and they're buying a Whole Food, and since Amazon sells groceries and Whole Foods sells groceries, they are reducing competition. I see what you're saying. I'm not sure that I agree with that necessarily is anti-competition, that they can't buy a grocery, because Amazon wasn't. I don't think that Amazon wasn't in that business, and they bought something, and I think what they bought is far bigger than trying to compete with Walmart. I think they are providing services Walmart doesn't provide. I think it allows them to push things that otherwise couldn't. In some ways, you can say that they leveled up the field, because the minute they bought Whole Food, they're not on the same basis, the same level as Walmart. Now they took on local real estate, they took on taxes, they took on the workforce and managing it. So in many ways, that did not really reduce competition, but put them at level competition with Walmart. So still, I'm not sure if you actually looked at it, that would be seen as anti-competitive, but might be. And Walmart has having influence over over politics, true, but so is Amazon. All these tech companies are putting money everywhere they can on all sides in order to get their agenda across. If they have certain agenda, they're going to support liberal senators and representatives. If they have certain concerns about regulation, they're going to support the Republicans. They'll throw their money everywhere, just like Walmart. So I'm not really concerned about that as much. Master of Osis. Warren's argument on Amazon anti-competitive behavior is that they promote their own captive brands in their search results above competitors. It's weak IMO, but there it is. Well, I mean, yeah, she's also arguing that with respect to Google, the idea is that if you're providing the platform and providing the product, you are not competing. But then you'd have to then say, well, how about other stores? If I go to my local supermarket, on every shelf, I will find a white label product. And that's true of every supermarket in the region. Are they acting in an anti-competitive manner? They're allowing all of these brands to sell through their supermarkets. They see what they sell well. They have an insider advantage, an insider access to data, and they decide, you know what, we should be. There's a lot of sales of these cereals. Let's get a white label on that cereal, place it right next to the big brand, and actually reduce the prices in order to do that. Now you would say, I mean, isn't that the same as Amazon or what Google is doing? Basically using their platform as to their advantage as well. So I'm not sure if that in itself is, when it comes to, I'm not sure if that's necessarily wrong. If you tell me that Amazon, if I search, I don't know, for batteries, Duracell batteries, and I'm not getting that. I'm getting the Amazon branded batteries, and I cannot find the competitors for 2-3 pages. Then I would say there's a problem here. There's false advertising problem that for which we have lost today, and something the Federal Trade Commission can go after them today. You know, and I think I don't need to break up Amazon. I don't need to undermine a platform that I enjoyed. I think a lot of people enjoyed because of some misbehavior, of some anti-competitive or false advertisement behavior. I think that the law just needs to be enforced here. And the FTC has to investigate it, and I think it has to enforce it. I'm just not buying the idea that a breakup of the company is needed in order to solve the problem. I don't disagree that there might be a problem, although I don't know if Amazon actually does that. But I just think that the solution can be a little more, I don't know, finite, a little more specific. You really can solve the problem without just breaking up the industries, deciding that you cannot have companies of a thing in excess of $50 million in revenue or something like that. I don't think that makes sense. I think $50 billion. Heimdall's Gate. What do you think of Chelsea Manning to be jailed again for refusing to testify against WikiLeaks? I know just a little bit about it and tell you what my question is. That whether or not, when I read it, and I know that the president commuted her sentence, whether or not by doing this, by jailing her for not testifying against WikiLeaks, it actually is undermining what the president did. you don't have to agree with what presidents did, but that's what presidents do all the time. They commute sentences, they pardon people that have been convicted, and just their power. That's a right they have, and I've disagreed with so many different presidents and the people they chose, but that's their right to do so. And I'm concerned about whether or not, when the government goes after her for not agreeing to testify, whether or not that's like a second bite at the apple. They already convicted her. She already went to jail, and now putting her back in jail because she refuses to respond, to provide them information about the very case she went to jail for and for which she's been commuted. They're trying to basically undermine what the prior president did. So that's the issue I have. I just don't have enough information to make a conclusion. That's just when I was reading about it, that's what I was thinking. Cons Clanseth. Amazon buying Whole Foods puts them in competition with Walmart, ShopRite, Kruger's, and H-E-B. Isn't that good for everyone? Exactly. That's exactly what I was saying. I think that it, in many ways, it levels the field. It makes it so Amazon starts paying taxes everywhere. I mean, it already started paying taxes in most locations, but now if they have locations through Whole Foods, they start paying taxes everywhere. Now they take on a lot of costs that their competitors didn't. In many ways, that's great. Nate, hey, how you doing? Been a while since I've caught you live. Between the algorithms of social media and the automation forecasted in the future, do you think the companies will be assuming more risk? Given that these machines and programs should be able to be precisely maintained, will human error or reasonable effort be removed as a potential defense for malfeasance? Wow, that's a lot to unwrap. I think that we're going to be moving more and more toward algorithms. I think that's just the reality of it. Companies have an interest to use less and less people. So, especially as they're growing to such massive size, it's just not practical for them to have as many people. So they're going to try to refine their algorithms. And I think that it's not going to get them out of the issue of malfeasance, because I think that I think that Representative, I keep forgetting his name, Cicilline, said, I think there is a problem with algorithms, and I think we need to discuss auditing algorithms. I don't believe that, Google needs to reveal its algorithms to the world, but I think to have some measure of confidential auditing that will give an outsider view on how decisions are being made. I think that's a valid concern here, because you can put a lot of biases into the algorithm himself, and you can back up and say it's not me, it's the algorithm. I don't think that's an excuse. So maybe a discussion on whether or not these large platforms should be considered utilities, and then they need to submit their algorithm to some sort of independent and confidential auditing in order to assure that certain non-discriminatory basis actually kept. I think is reason behind it. So I don't think that it protects them, but I think if you create a system and you allow for auditing, you can then grant them immunity to the extent to which there are any problem with the algorithms. I don't see a problem with that. If a platform is willing to adhere to some anti-discrimination basis on a broad scale, not just based on specific, but rather based on a broad scale, and then submit their algorithm to an auditing, I'm pro granting them immunity from any problem that might come up as a result of the bad algorithms. John Bushka. Some conservatives have lost personal bank accounts. Could some of these cases be related to actual consumer misconduct, laundering, misappropriation of trust? It could be. I mean, there is a... Look. Me and the group of volunteers are working on this case, and in the process, we're learning a great deal, right? I mean, on what could cause something to be terminated. What could be the basis? So there could be a lot of things that could cause an individual to have his bank account terminated. So I can't speak about it, and especially when it's coming through social media, a lot of times you don't know the entire story. But is it possible that there's something else? This is not about malfeasance. It's not about money laundering. This is about banks wanting to disassociate themselves from certain individual based on the content of their speech, on their association with people they disagree with. I think that's a real discussion, and we need to have that. I think we already have anti-discrimination laws when it comes to financial services and facilities providing credit, but I think we have to look at it from a much broader perspective. Until now, we've only been concerned about discrimination when it comes to very, very specific classes. I think we can broaden and say, you know what, these kind of utilities, including banks and credit cards, well, they should be treated like water and electricity. They're so needed for the running of our everyday life. They should not be able to discriminate based on anything short of, you know, you're not paying your bills, or you're defaulting on the loan, something like that, or you breaking the law. But the idea that they should have the freedom to disassociate themselves from individuals they disagree with, I have a problem with. So I don't know what's the basis. I've heard a lot of it. I've seen a lot of this story. People sending me a lot of those stories on Twitter, and they're interesting. And I don't know what necessarily drove the bank to do so. But I think it still should be part of this entire conversation on what is a platform? What is a utility? What is so fundamental to our lives when it comes to our ability to speak, to associate, to manage our own lives, to run our lives, that we need to make sure it's provided on a non-discriminatory basis to everyone? I think it's a valid question. Nope, help, nope. Ever read the Gulag Archipelago? No, I did not. I heard of it, but never read it. Mike Musk. Part 1. Why is it that Elon cannot speak about what he wants? Because someone insists invest in his company, he's their slave now? Isn't that part of the risk of investment? Well, let's just start with that. There's a reason, and it's valid. The idea being that it's not about him not being able to speak his mind. The difficulty is that when a public company provides information, it needs to provide it to everyone. And so companies are very, very careful in making sure that information is not provided to a segment of the population, but not to everybody else. That's called, for instance, insider trading, right? That's why they are very careful in what they say, and they parse out each and every word. And the problem with what Elon Musk said is that in his nonchalant way, in his very, very casual way, when he spoke, he effectively misinformed the world about what's actually happened. In fact, let's just be straightforward. He lied. He made claims about that he has investors willing to take the company private. That was a complete lie. Okay, for whatever reason he said it, it was a complete untruth. And since the SEC is concerned about making sure that the market is on a level playing field for everyone, it takes a very hard stance when non-truth are being circulated by companies, their officers, their directors. So yes, when you are taking money from people, you have certain obligations that you don't if you are running a private company. And if you want the right to sell stock to the public, you need to make sure not only that any truthful information is shared equally across the population, so there are no, pockets of people that have greater access than others, but you also have to make sure that no false information is being shared, because that can cause immense losses to the population, which is exactly what happened. He provided false information to the public about whether or not he actually had investors willing to take Tesla private, the result of which there was a massive drop in the value of the shares, which was untrue, because once the truth came up, the shares bounced up. Those people that sold because they heard what Elon Musk said and they believed him lost money. And that's the issue here. Part 2, if I put money in YouTube and I lose money because of some controversy such as policy change that causes it to fail, can I hold them liable? If that's not fair to them, no, you cannot hold them liable. But that's not what happened with him. It's all about, look, if he said something and it was a complete truth, at that point you could argue that he's not liable. There's a problem with that, because by now public companies have a way of spreading information, and they don't do it by tweeting. You know, because that may not necessarily be the most effective way of explaining what's happening. They tend to actually be much more long form and actually explain what they're involved in. So he used a medium that is, I think, can inherently be incomplete, a way of not providing full information. So it's quite possible, even if it was truthful, because of the nature of how Twitter works, that it would still have been misleading and still be held liable under it. So there are just rules to the way public companies are run, and a lot of people hate it. I've had friends who said it was the worst part of their lives when they were in charge of public companies. Great, so run private companies. Don't go to the public. Don't try to sell your shares online. There's a reason, not online, to the public through the stock market. There's a reason why people do it, because it's easy to raise money. You want your shares to be listed on NASDAQ because it's easy for you to then sell the shares and actually raise more money to use it to fund your company, rather than negotiate with large investors that want a lot of things from you. It's usually cheaper to go to the public, but that's your cost, which is disclosure, and that's basically the basis of our public markets. What kind of disclosures must be provided? It's very much formulated. You have to say things a certain way. You have to be very careful. You have to provide a lot of disclosures and disclaimers. It's not simple, and that's why you don't see CEOs disclosing brand new information on Twitter. Their lawyers wouldn't want it. You want to write stuff, you want your lawyers to review it. It's very complicated, and that's the cost of raising money from the public. John Taylor, I don't think it's anti-competitive. I think Warren is being influenced by Walmart to hobble Amazon. I can't respond to something I don't know. It's quite possible. I mean, I don't want to claim that these politicians are not in the pocket of some interest. It's quite possible that Walmart, with its large pockets, is investing or is putting its money behind Warren, and she's pushing forward policies that might be pro-Walmart by saying that it's the online platforms that need to be broken up, but companies like Walmart that has its own white labels, those don't need to be broken up. So it's quite possible. I just don't have any information about it because I don't know anything more than that. That's true. I think we're good here. I think that was the last question to me. Lots of comments, which are great, but I think that was the last comment here. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you coming here. I know 8 o'clock is late for a lot of people, and often on Tuesdays we have a lot of different streams coming up at the same time over times. You know, a lot of things to compete. So I appreciate when each and every one of you comes here and shares and post a comment, a question. Please, before you leave, click like on the video. That really help. Most likely this video will go into archives immediately when it finishes, and then I'll re-upload it tomorrow to the secondary channel called Legal Dissent. Only the initial part will actually be uploaded to this channel. Seems to work a little better than just leaving the entirety of the live stream on this channel. If you have any questions, any concerns, anything you want to discuss, leave them down below in the comment. I'd love to talk to you. I'll see you next time.